Dorothy Caldwell carefully tended to her prized roses, her weathered hands working the soil with practiced precision. At 75, she moved with surprising grace, a testament to a lifetime of activity and purpose. The modest ranch-style home she shared with her husband Walter sat on the quiet end of an upscale neighborhood, deliberately understated compared to the mansions that lined the rest of the street. "These beauties will win at the garden club this year," she murmured to herself, admiring the vibrant blooms. Her gardening clothes, faded jeans, a simple lavender sweater, and a well-worn gray cardigan, were speckled with soil, just how she liked them. Dorothy and Walter had been married for nearly 5 decades, building a life that defied expectations. Walter had transformed a small family business into a national corporation before retiring 10 years ago. Their fortune was substantial, but you'd never know it by looking at them. They drove sensible cars, lived in a comfortable but modest home, and dressed without flashy logos or designer labels. "We don't need to announce our bank account to the world," Walter often said. Dorothy agreed wholeheartedly. Their wealth was a tool, not an identity. After finishing her gardening, Dorothy checked her watch. Walter was at his weekly golf game with friends, fellow businessmen who shared their philosophy of humble living despite success. She smiled, suddenly struck by an idea. Their anniversary was coming up, and Walter's old sedan was showing its age. "Perhaps it's time for something new. Why not look at some options?" she said aloud, brushing soil from her hands. Dorothy had noticed a luxury car dealership during her drive to the community center last week. The sleek vehicles in the window had caught her eye, not for their status, but for their craftsmanship. Walter appreciated quality engineering, even if he didn't care for showing off. She decided to go have a look. Nothing serious, just browsing to get ideas. Dorothy quickly washed her hands, but didn't bother changing. Her appearance had never defined her worth. And at her age, comfort trumped fashion every time. As she backed her 10-year-old sedan out of the driveway, Dorothy had no idea that her simple decision would lead to one of the most humiliating and ultimately satisfying encounters of her life. She hummed softly, envisioning Walter's surprise if she found something special. After all these years, she still loved bringing joy to the man who had stood beside her through life's many chapters. The luxury car dealership gleamed in the afternoon sun, its glass facade reflecting the cloudless sky. Rows of high-end vehicles, sleek sports cars, elegant sedans, and imposing SUVs sat on display, their polished surfaces almost too bright to look at directly. Prestige Motors, read the understated but unmistakably expensive sign above the entrance. Dorothy parked her modest sedan between 2 expensive vehicles that made her car look even more out of place. She straightened her cardigan, suddenly aware of the soil still lingering under her fingernails and the casual nature of her attire. For a brief moment, she considered coming back another day, perhaps better dressed. "Don't be silly," she muttered to herself. "You're just looking." She stepped into the showroom, immediately enveloped by the scent of leather and subtle cologne. The space was immaculate, gleaming tile floors, tasteful lighting designed to make every curve and contour of the vehicles pop, and comfortable seating arrangements for clients. Classical music played softly in the background. Several salespeople in tailored suits moved around the floor, engaged with customers who looked like they had just stepped out of a business magazine. Dorothy noticed she was the only person in casual clothes, and certainly the oldest by at least 2 decades. Her eyes were drawn to a striking yellow sports car. Its design was both elegant and aggressive, with lines that suggested motion even as it sat perfectly still. Dorothy approached it slowly, genuinely appreciating its artistry. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, allowing her fingertips to hover just above the surface without touching it. As she circled the vehicle, Dorothy noticed a young man watching her, tall, with perfectly styled hair and an expensive suit. He stood with his arms crossed, whispering something to another salesperson who nodded and smirked in her direction. The young man, Kevin, according to his name tag, finally approached her, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting he doubted she needed any help at all. At least, not with purchasing a car. "Just looking for now," Dorothy replied pleasantly. "My husband might be interested in something new." Kevin's eyes swept over her gardening clothes, lingering on the soil stains on her cardigan and her practical shoes. His expression shifted from professional disinterest to barely concealed disdain. "These vehicles start at $90,000, he said flatly. "The one you're looking at is $275,000. Dorothy nodded, unperturbed by the prices. "It's quite extraordinary. Is it possible to see the interior?" Kevin hesitated, his disbelief evident. Around them, other salespeople were engaged in animated conversations with clients who fit the dealership's expected demographic. Dorothy stood her ground, her dignity intact despite Kevin's obvious judgment. Kevin's hesitation lasted only a moment before he produced a thin, practiced smile. "Of course," he said, though his tone suggested he was simply humoring her. He pressed a button on a sleek key fob, and the car's door opened upward with theatrical elegance. The Velocity's GT features hand-stitched Italian leather, carbon fiber trim, and a custom sound system. He rattled off mechanically, without the enthusiasm he would typically reserve for a serious customer. Dorothy leaned in carefully, admiring the craftsmanship without touching anything. "The detailing is exquisite," she observed. Kevin checked his watch, making no effort to hide his impatience. "It does 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds, though I doubt that's a selling point for your husband." The slight pause conveyed his skepticism about the existence of said husband, or at least his ability to afford such a vehicle. From across the showroom, Dorothy noticed two other salespeople glancing her way and chuckling. A well-dressed couple who had entered after her were already being offered refreshments and seated in the luxurious client lounge area. "What about financing options?" Dorothy asked, straightening up. Kevin's eyebrows rose slightly. "Our financing requires excellent credit and typically a substantial down payment." He emphasized the word substantial, as if explaining a difficult concept to a child. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at our certified pre-owned location across town." A passing manager caught Kevin's eye and made a subtle gesture that seemed to say, "Why are you wasting time?" Kevin nodded in acknowledgement. The monthly payment on this model would be more than. He paused, looking at Dorothy's simple watch and worn cardigan. "Well, let's just say it's significant." Dorothy maintained her composure, though the humiliation was beginning to seep through her calm exterior. Still, she persisted. "I'd still like to see some options. Perhaps something in a sedan. My husband enjoys a smooth ride." Kevin sighed, not bothering to disguise his frustration now. "Ma'am, all our vehicles are luxury models. Even our most basic sedan costs more than most people's entire retirement savings." A younger salesperson approached, whispering something in Kevin's ear. Kevin nodded, looking relieved. "I'm afraid I need to assist some clients who have an appointment," he said, not bothering to hide his relief. "Feel free to look around, but please don't touch the vehicles. Some of these paint jobs cost more than a small car." With that, he walked away briskly, greeting a middle-aged couple in designer clothing with a warmth and enthusiasm that had been entirely absent during his interaction with Dorothy. She stood alone beside the yellow sports car, feeling increasingly out of place as other customers and staff continued to steal glances her way. The confrontation Dorothy moved away from the yellow sports car, trying to maintain her dignity despite the stares following her across the showroom. She approached a sleek silver sedan, its elegant lines more in keeping with what Walter might prefer. At 78, he valued comfort over flash, reliability over raw speed. As she studied the vehicle's contours, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Kevin approaching with a stern-looking man in an expensive suit. Clearly a manager, based on his authoritative demeanor and the way other staff seemed to defer to him. "Ma'am," the manager began without introduction, his voice polite but firm. "Kevin mentioned you're interested in our vehicles, but I'm concerned there might be some confusion about our clientele." Dorothy blinked, taken aback by the directness. "I don't believe there's any confusion. I'm looking at options for my husband." The manager exchanged a look with Kevin, who smirked slightly. "Our vehicles represent significant investments," the manager continued. "Our smallest financing packages begin at over $1,500 monthly." "Unaware of luxury pricing," Dorothy replied calmly, though she could feel heat rising to her cheeks. The manager's expression hardened. "Ma'am, we pride ourselves on creating an appropriate atmosphere for our clients. We've received some concerns about," he gestured vaguely at her gardening attire, "browsers who may not be in a position to purchase." Several nearby customers were now watching the interaction, some with embarrassment, others with a hint of cruel amusement. A well-dressed woman whispered something to her companion, who chuckled softly. "Are you asking me to leave?" Dorothy asked, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning through her. Kevin stepped forward, clearly enjoying the moment. "We're simply suggesting that perhaps this isn't the right establishment for your budget constraints." His eyes swept over her cardigan and comfortable shoes once more. "The used car lot on Jefferson might be more suitable," the manager added. "We're very busy with scheduled appointments today, unless you're prepared to discuss specific financing options right now." Dorothy straightened her back, summoning the dignity that had carried her through 75 years of life. "I see exits there," Kevin said suddenly, pointing toward the glass doors with an exaggerated gesture. His voice was loud enough that every head in the showroom turned. "Let me know if you need directions to the bus stop." A few gasps came from onlookers, shocked by the naked rudeness. The manager, realizing Kevin had gone too far, looked uncomfortable but did nothing to correct him. Dorothy's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her purse. Without another word, she walked toward the exit, her steps measured and deliberate. Behind her, she heard Kevin's smug voice. "Some people just don't know their place." As the door closed behind her, Dorothy took a steadying breath. The humiliation stung, but something else was forming beneath it, a quiet, resolute determination. The planned Dorothy drove home in silence, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road, but she hardly noticed the beautiful day. The encounter at the dealership replayed in her mind. Kevin's sneering face, the manager's thinly veiled contempt, the stares from other customers. "Some people just don't know their place," Kevin had said. The words echoed painfully. By the time she pulled into her driveway, Dorothy had moved beyond humiliation to a quiet anger. Not a burning rage, but the steady, resolved indignation of someone who had lived long enough to recognize injustice when she saw it. She entered the house mechanically, handing her cardigan on the hook by the door. Their home was modestly furnished, but filled with quality pieces that had been carefully maintained over decades. Photographs chronicling their life together lined the hallway. Walter and Dorothy on their wedding day, at the grand opening of his company's headquarters, on vacations with their children and grandchildren. One photo in particular caught her eye. Walter receiving a humanitarian award for his philanthropic work. He stood at a podium, humble as always, explaining why he donated millions to educational programs and underserved communities. "Success without purpose is meaningless," he'd said in his acceptance speech. Dorothy made her way to the kitchen and filled the kettle. Tea had always been her remedy for unsettling experiences. As the water heated, she gazed out the window at her garden, the roses she'd been tending earlier now catching the late afternoon light. "You're being silly," she told herself. It shouldn't matter how one rude young man treated you, but it did matter. Not because her feelings were hurt, though they were. It mattered because people like Kevin moved through the world believing they could judge others based on appearances, that they could determine someone's worth by their clothes or age. The kettle whistled. Dorothy prepared her tea methodically, the familiar ritual bringing a small measure of comfort. She carried the steaming mug to the living room and settled into her favorite chair, her thoughts still tumultuous. She wasn't concerned about herself. At 75, she had developed a thick skin against life's petty cruelties. What troubled her was the thought of others, people without her resources or life experience, being subjected to such treatment. The sound of a car in the driveway pulled her from her thoughts. Walter was home. Dorothy took a deep breath, unsure whether to share her experience or simply let it go. Walter had never tolerated disrespect, especially toward her. His temper, though rarely seen, could be formidable when roused. She heard his key in the lock, followed by his familiar footsteps in the hallway. "Dorothy, I'm home," he called out cheerfully. The decision made itself. This was Walter, her partner of 50 years. They had never kept things from each other. Walter Caldwell entered the living room with a smile that quickly faded when he saw Dorothy's expression. At 78, he remained tall and distinguished, his silver hair and alert blue eyes giving him a stately appearance despite his casual golf attire. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, setting down his keys and moving to the side. Dorothy sighed, patting the space beside her on the sofa. "I had an unpleasant experience today." Walter sat down, concern etched on his features as Dorothy recounted her visit to the dealership. She described Kevin's condescension, the manager's thinly veiled suggestion that she didn't belong, and the final humiliating dismissal. She kept her voice steady, but Walter could hear the hurt beneath her composure. As she spoke, Walter's expression darkened, his jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek, a sign Dorothy recognized from their 5 decades together. He was angry, deeply so. "They had no right," he said when she finished, his voice low and controlled. "No right at all." Dorothy patted his hand. "It's not the first time someone has judged me by my appearance, and at my age, it certainly won't be the last." Walter shook his head, rising to pace the room. "That's not the point, Dot. We spent our lives believing that character matters more than appearances. We've raised our children with those values. We've built our foundation on those principles." He stopped, turning to face her. "And some arrogant young salesman thinks he can humiliate my wife because she doesn't fit his idea of wealth." Dorothy watched him, a small smile forming despite her lingering distress. Walter's indignation wasn't just for her. It was for the principle of the thing. It was one of the countless reasons she'd loved him all these years. "What was the name of this place?" Walter asked suddenly. "Prestige Motors," Dorothy replied. "But Walter, don't do anything rash. It's not worth getting upset over." Walter sat back down beside her, taking her hands in his. "Dorothy Caldwell, after 50 years, you should know I never do anything rash." A smile crept across his face, the kind that had always meant he was formulating a plan. "However, I do believe in consequences for actions." "What are you thinking?" Dorothy asked, recognizing the gleam in his eye. "I'm thinking," Walter said deliberately, "that we've been too modest for too long. Perhaps it's time to make an exception, just this once." Dorothy studied her husband's face. "You're plotting something." Walter chuckled, a deep, warm sound that had always been her favorite melody. "Not plotting, my dear. Teaching. There's a difference." He squeezed her hands gently. "Do you trust me?" Dorothy nodded without hesitation. "Always have." "Good," Walter replied, his smile growing, "because tomorrow we're going car shopping." The return, the next morning, arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows. Walter was already up, unusual for a man who typically enjoyed leisurely mornings. Dorothy found him in his study, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in the authoritative tone he'd used during his business days. "Yes, James, the Phantom. Have it brought around by 10. He nodded at something the person on the other end said. "Perfect. Thank you." Dorothy raised an eyebrow as he hung up. "The Phantom? Walter, what exactly are you planning?" Walter turned to her with a smile that combined mischief and satisfaction. "Just making a phone call to an old friend who manages my investments. James happens to collect automobiles." Understanding dawned on Dorothy's face. "You're borrowing a Rolls-Royce." "Not just any Rolls-Royce," Walter corrected, his eyes twinkling. "The Phantom, the flagship model, the most expensive production sedan in America." Dorothy shook her head, caught between amusement and concern. "All this because of one rude salesman." Walter approached her, his expression softening. "No, Dot, not because of him. Because of you." He took her hands in his. "For 50 years, you've embodied grace and humility. You've never needed validation from people like that young man. But that doesn't mean you should accept disrespect." Dorothy squeezed his hands, touched by his sentiment. "What's your plan?" "We're going to visit Prestige Motors," Walter explained. "No confrontation, no shouting. We'll simply make our presence known." An hour later, Dorothy stood before the mirror, transformed. She wore an elegant navy dress, simple but beautifully tailored, with a strand of pearls Walter had given her on their 30th anniversary. Her silver hair was neatly styled, and subtle makeup enhanced her still vibrant features. Walter appeared beside her, handsome in a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, one of the few truly expensive items in his wardrobe, reserved for special occasions. "Ready to make an entrance, Mrs. Caldwell?" he asked, offering his arm. Dorothy smiled, slipping her hand through his elbow. "Lead the way, Mr. Caldwell." The gleaming Rolls-Royce Phantom glided through traffic like a yacht on calm waters, its iconic spirit of ecstasy hood ornament leading the way. Walter drove with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to luxury, though he rarely indulged in such displays. "James certainly keeps this beauty in pristine condition," Dorothy remarked, running her hand over the handcrafted leather interior. The vehicle was the epitome of automotive luxury, powerful yet whisper-quiet, opulent without being gaudy. "He treats his collection better than most people treat their children," Walter chuckled. "He was almost reluctant to let me borrow it." They turned onto the street where Prestige Motors stood, its glassed facade reflecting the late morning sun. Several customers milled about the front lot, admiring the expensive vehicles on display. "Are you sure about this?" Dorothy asked, a momentary hesitation in her voice. Walter reached over to squeeze her hand. "Absolutely certain. Remember, we're not here for revenge. We're here for a lesson in humility. Theirs, not ours." As they approached the dealership, heads began to turn. The Phantom commanded attention not through flashiness, but through its understated magnificence. Walter pulled slowly into the entrance, deliberately positioning the vehicle directly in front of the main doors where it would be impossible to miss. Inside the showroom, activity seemed to pause as staff and customers alike turned to look at the new arrival. Through the glass, Dorothy could see Kevin standing with a client, his sales pitch halting mid-sentence as he registered the Rolls-Royce. Walter stepped out first, circling to open Dorothy's door with a gallant gesture. She emerged with quiet dignity, her head held high. Together, they approached the entrance, moving unhurriedly, allowing the moment to build. The door slid open automatically. The same classical music played softly in the background. The same luxury vehicles gleamed under strategic lighting, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically from the previous day. The manager Dorothy had encountered stood frozen near the reception desk, recognition and confusion battling across his features. Several salespeople hovered nearby, uncertain how to proceed. And then there was Kevin, his confident smirk replaced by an expression of dawning realization. Walter's hand rested lightly at the small of Dorothy's back as they stepped fully into the showroom. The gesture was both protective and proud. "Good morning," Walter said pleasantly, his voice carrying in the suddenly quiet space. My wife tells me you have some interesting vehicles here. We'd like to take a look around. The manager stepped forward, professional smile snapping into place, though his eyes betrayed his unease. Of course, sir. Welcome to Prestige Motors. I'd be happy to assist you personally. Walter's smile remained pleasant, but there was steel behind it. Actually, he said, I believe we've already met one of your salespeople. Kevin, isn't it? The lesson Kevin's face had drained of color, resembling the expensive pearl white paint job on one of the nearby luxury sedans. He stood rooted to the spot, his usual confident demeanor evaporated like morning dew under a blazing sun. The manager, sensing something was amiss, quickly intervened. I'm Richard Harrington, General Manager, he said, extending his hand to Walter. How can we help you today, Mr. Caldwell? Walter replied, accepting the handshake firmly. Walter Caldwell. And this is my wife, Dorothy. His emphasis on the word wife was subtle but unmistakable. Recognition flickered in the manager's eyes. Whether of the name or the situation, it wasn't clear. Mrs. Caldwell, he said, nodding to Dorothy with newfound respect. Welcome back to our dealership. Yes, Dorothy said calmly. I was here yesterday, though the welcome was considerably different. An uncomfortable silence descended. Other customers and staff had stopped pretending not to watch the unfolding scene. I understand there may have been a misunderstanding. The manager began carefully, shooting a warning glance at Kevin, who remained pale and silent. Walter raised an eyebrow. A misunderstanding? I don't believe there was anything misunderstood. My wife was judged by her appearance and treated with contempt. His voice remained pleasant, which somehow made his words more impactful. Kevin here even pointed her to the exit and suggested the bus stop. The manager's face tightened with barely concealed anger, now directed at Kevin. I see, he said tersely. We've been married for 50 years, Walter continued, placing his hand gently on Dorothy's shoulder. In that time, we've learned that how you treat people when you think they can't do anything for you reveals your true character. Kevin finally found his voice, though it emerged strained and unnaturally high. Sir, I had no idea that. She's married to someone wealthy. Walter finished for him. That's precisely the point, young man. You shouldn't need that information to treat someone with basic human dignity. Dorothy, who had been quiet, spoke up. I didn't come here yesterday flaunting wealth or demanding special treatment. I came as a normal person interested in your products. The showroom remained unnaturally silent. Even the piped-in classical music seemed to have paused for the confrontation. Mr. Caldwell, the manager said, clearly in damage control mode, please allow me to personally show you and Mrs. Caldwell our collection. I assure you this incident doesn't reflect our company values. Walter shook his head. That won't be necessary. We didn't come to buy a car today. Then why? The question hung in the air. Dorothy stepped forward, her eyes finding Kevin's. We came to remind you that worth isn't measured by appearances or possessions. It's measured by how you treat others, especially those you believe can do nothing for you. Walter nodded. A lesson I'd have thought was obvious to anyone in the business of selling status symbols. The truth settled over the showroom like a heavy blanket. They hadn't come to buy. They had come to teach. The silence that followed Dorothy's words was profound. Kevin stared at the floor, his face a mixture of shame and fear, likely for his job. The manager looked torn between professional damage control and genuine remorse. Walter turned to Dorothy, offering his arm. Shall we, my dear? I believe our point has been made. As they turned to leave, Richard Harrington, the manager, stepped forward. Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, please, a moment. His voice had lost its sales polish, replaced by something more authentic. On behalf of Prestige Motors, I want to offer you a sincere apology. Dorothy studied the man's face, seeing real regret there. Thank you, Mr. Harrington. The manager turned to Kevin. Kevin will be undergoing extensive retraining if he remains with our company. The implication was clear. Kevin looked up, finally meeting Dorothy's eyes. "Mrs. Caldwell, Mr. Caldwell, I'm truly sorry. I was wrong. Completely wrong." The words seemed torn from him, painful but necessary. Walter nodded, acknowledging the apology without necessarily accepting it. "Life gives us many opportunities to learn, young man. This is one of yours." As they walked toward the exit, Dorothy noticed the other customers watching with newfound respect. A few nodded approvingly. The lesson wasn't just for Kevin. It was for everyone who had witnessed the exchange. Outside, the Rolls-Royce Phantom waited regularly. Walter opened Dorothy's door with the same care and attention he had shown for 5 decades. "Was it worth it?" Dorothy asked quietly as they settled into the luxurious interior. Walter took her hand, his eyes crinkling with the smile she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Seeing you stand there with such dignity? Absolutely." As the Phantom glided away from Prestige Motors, Dorothy reflected on the day's events. They had made their point without cruelty or excessive vengeance, simply by showing up as themselves. "You know," Walter said thoughtfully, "James did mention he's looking to sell this beauty." Dorothy laughed, the tension of the past 24 hours finally breaking. "Don't you dare, Walter Caldwell. Our Buick works just fine." Walter's answering laughter filled the car. After 50 years, they remained exactly who they had always been. Wealthy in what mattered most. Sometimes the most powerful statement is challenging expectations. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and join our community of viewers who appreciate stories of quiet strength and unexpected talent. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing from our global audience. Everyday people are underestimated based on appearance, gender, or background. Have you ever been in a situation where you surprised others with your hidden talents? Share your experiences in the comments, and remember, the most powerful skill isn't just expertise, but the quiet confidence to stand your ground when others doubt you. Until next time.